Well, welcome again to Palm Beach Atlantic University and the LeMieux Center for Public Policy. Today we have the great honor of being able to speak to a man who has served our country with tremendous distinction, Secretary Robert Gates. Thank you for being here, sir.
My pleasure.
To think about someone who has served 8 presidents, the only person in the history of America who has served 2 presidents as the Secretary of Defense, what an amazing career you've had. And I want to just have our viewers get a sense of, and you've had all these roles, head of the CIA, National Security Council, but what is it like? What is a day in the life like being the Secretary of Defense?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of meetings, and there's hardly a day that goes by that there isn't a meeting in the Situation Room, sometimes 2 or 3. The whole time I was secretary, the nation was at war, and so every day involved meetings in terms of assigning which troops will deploy, making sure that they have the equipment that they need, and taking care of them. And especially if they're wounded, one of my first acts, I was only in office 2 months when I discovered that there was a real scandal in the treatment of outpatient wounded warriors, Walter Reed Army Hospital, and I ended up firing the hospital commander, the Surgeon General of the Army, and the Secretary of the Army because I felt that taking care of the troops was the highest priority.
So that's a real act of leadership. And, you know, as the secretary, the person on top of this enormous institution, by making that change, you sent a message throughout the institution that this mattered to you.
People get fired in Washington all the time for scandals and things like that, but the notion you could be fired for not doing your job well enough was absolutely revolutionary. And so it sent a message that people were going to be held accountable.
When you're in a position like that and the country is at war, Afghanistan, Iraq, you have to make so many decisions, and you have to rely upon the people who report to you because you can't make every decision, but you have to make the big decisions. Give us a little sense of what your leadership style was and how you moved that agency and said grace over those 2 wars.
So I believe that you can make big changes in institutions if you have an inclusive and transparent decision-making process. And there were times when I made a decision where everyone in the building, the Pentagon, both military and civilian, opposed the decision, but they were all in on the decision-making process, and they knew why I was asking the questions. They had an opportunity to provide their opinions. They knew what was going on. They felt respected. But in the case of our kids were being blown up in these Humvees in Iraq, and I found out about these mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles that had a V-shaped curve, a hole, and that the Marines had a few models of these in Anbar province, and in 300 attacks, not a single Marine had been killed. So I thought we ought to buy these, and the opposition in the building was, well, it's not part of our budget, it's not part of our long-term program, what will we do with them when the war is over, and so on and so forth. I said, we're at war now. Kids are dying now and losing limbs. So we're at war. We're going to buy these things. Fortunately, I had very strong bipartisan support in the Congress, especially in the Senate, and got every dollar I needed. We bought 27,000 of those vehicles, and they saved thousands of lives. But no one in the building thought we needed to do that. And I just, sometimes you just have to decide and do what you think is right when you have the responsibility. So normally I would try and, I hate consensus. Consensus generally means everything gets watered down or you end up with the lowest common denominator. So I wanted, when I would have a meeting, I want to hear the sharp differences of view of people. And I think they felt it was more gratifying that, they were in a meeting where they actually could say what they felt, and then a decision would be made.
Amazing to have that insight on how those big decisions were made. As we sit here today, now you're in private life, and boy, the world seems to be on fire, right? We have a land war in Europe. We have a rising China who is threatening all sorts of our interests, including Taiwan. We have Iran, who is rushing, it appears, to get a nuclear weapon, and the Middle East has been on fire. Is this world more dangerous than it was even when you were the Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I do believe it is. I believe that it is more dangerous, perhaps, than at any time since 1940. For the first time, we have well-armed, aggressive adversaries, both in Europe and in Asia, willing to fight. In China, we have a country that is much more technologically sophisticated, much more economically successful, much less corrupt and more effective than the Soviet Union ever was. And they're modernizing all of their military branches. And then, as you mentioned, we have North Korea. And who knows what that guy is going to do. But he is increasing the sophistication of his missiles. He's putting missiles on submarines. And then you have Iran looking like it's headed for a nuclear weapon. And they're all working together. And, the word axis gets overworked, but they are, in fact, collaborating. I mean, the North Koreans have sent 12,000 troops to Ukraine to fight with the Russians. They've sent the Russians 3 million artillery shells. And the Iranians are building a drone factory in Russia. So these guys are collaborating. One of my concerns is that we don't have an overall strategy in terms of how do we counter all of this going on at the same time.
Remember, in thinking about your comments there with President Nixon and Secretary of State Kissinger, they did detente with China to create a triangle, a little bit of a separation between the two communist powers. Do you think that there will be some effort in this new administration to try to create some new alliances, divide that axis in order to put the United States in a safer place?
I think that they probably would like to do that. I think it's going to be very tough with Putin in power. I met with him on a number of occasions. He believes his personal destiny is to recreate the Russian Empire. And as one of my old mentors, Zbigniew Brzezinski, once said, without Ukraine, there is no Russian Empire. And so I think, and as long as the Ukraine war is going, I think it's going to be very difficult to create some space between Putin and the Chinese.
Who's the junior partner and who's the senior partner in the Russia-China relationship?
Russia, for sure. Economically, militarily, and, it was telling earlier in the war when people were worried about the Russians using nuclear weapons in Ukraine, tactical nuclear weapons. Xi came out twice publicly and said, don't do that. So I think everybody recognizes that. And if there is a chance of beginning to divide those two countries down the road, it'll be because Russia's the junior partner, because the Russians are concerned about Chinese inroads in Central Asia and Kazakhstan and so on, and because the Russians are increasingly economically dependent on China for their supplies and all the things they can't get in other ways because of our sanctions. So if there's a chance down the road of some creating some daylight between the two of them, it'll be because Russia is the junior partner. And frankly, the Russians see all that empty space in Siberia, and they see 1.2 billion Chinese, and there's all these resources in Siberia, and there are already more than 1 million Chinese working in Russia, in Vladivostok and Khabarovsk and places like that. So that may be the one place to work on in the future.
Well, these are the kind of conversations we have here at Palm Beach Atlantic University. Our great thanks to Secretary Robert Gates for your service to our country and for being with her for these great conversations. Stay tuned for more of these and for more events here at Palm Beach Atlantic. Thank you.